in the past, they made wonderful progress in their relationship with the Lord. They had excellent teachers. They were very obedient. They grew exceptionally well. And they went through a terrible wave of persecution and weathered the storm. Now they are beginning to entertain doubts about the validity of Christianity. And a lot of these doubts are being raised by their unbelieving Jewish brethren who are saying things like, Jesus could not be the Messiah. The Messiah we see described in the Old Testament is going to have a kingdom. He will, in fact, rule over not a country, the whole world. Jesus has no kingdom. He was ruled over by the Roman government. And Jesus can't be the Messiah because the Messiah we see in the Old Testament is going to smash all nations with a rod of iron. Jesus didn't smash anybody. He himself was smashed on the cross. And Jesus can't be your high priest because the Old Testament is quite clear on this. The high priest must come from the tribe of Levi, and everybody knows Jesus came from the wrong tribe. He came from the tribe of Judah. And so they are entertaining doubts about the validity of Christianity. And making matters worse, they now see a second and worst wave of persecution on their radar headed their way. And what persecution will this be? The Neronian persecution, when Nero set Christians afire out in public, when he fed them to the lions. Now, in the first wave of persecution, none of the people that he's addressing had lost their lives, no martyrs. But now the book of Hebrews is going to be used by God to prepare this church in Rome for the horrible Neronian persecution where there will be lots and lots of martyrs among them. And the readers of Hebrews are so discouraged at this point, they're sitting on the fence. They're trying to keep one foot in the Christian church and the other foot in the Jewish synagogue. They're thinking about abandoning Christianity and just going back to and remaining in Judaism. And that's why the writer is going to say in 12:12, strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble. They are just about to throw up their hands, toss in the towel, and just quit the Christian life altogether. And so the writer is going to urge them to persevere. He's going to say in 10:23, let's hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. And what does he mean by persevere?
Endure.
Yeah, it is to endure. If you look up the word persevere in the Oxford English Dictionary, it will say persistence in the light of difficulty in order to attain some good. Now that's correct, but that is the secular idea of perseverance. I want to give a more Christian definition of perseverance. And perseverance is continuing to believe the gospel intellectually. You don't change your mind about the deity of Christ. You don't stop believing in salvation by grace through faith. You don't give up the idea there will be a resurrection and eternal judgment. You don't quit believing that Christ is coming back to this earth a second time. And it is also continuing to obey the gospel practically, thus remaining loyal to Christ until he returns to earth or until we die. And the writer is going to say in the very first word in chapter 12 in verse 1, therefore. Now he's going to look back to the Old Testament saints that he lists in chapter 11, and he's going to remind the readers of Hebrews, What did all those godly men and women do? They persevered. They had their share of problems, tragedies, trials, difficulties, persecutions. They did not quit. They weathered the storm. And how did they weather the storm? 19 times in Hebrews 11, he uses the expression by faith. That's how they did it. It wasn't that they were just strong in and of themselves. They didn't have the strength to weather all that persecution. They relied upon God, and He gave them His power that enabled them to persevere. Now, can we, the readers are wondering, scratching their head, persevere like those Old Testament saints did? And the writer's going to say, now here's the key word in the book of Hebrews, better. It occurs 13 times. 13 chapters in Hebrews, one per chapter. And what's he going to say in here? We have a better covenant, chapter 8, better promises, chapter 7, better high priest, chapter 7, better hope, chapter 7. We have better, we who live after the cross, after the Messiah has come, we have better spiritual resources, a better relationship with God than all those saints did in the Old Testament. In fact, in chapter 9 and 10, the writer's going to say, all those sins that Israel committed back there, they never were taken away and removed. God put a Band-Aid on cancer. He postponed the payment for Israel's sins until the Messiah came, who sacrificed himself on the cross. There was the payment for Israel's sins. There's the payment for the sins of Gentiles as well. And so Israel really lacked a thorough, clear conscience that you and I can enjoy today, because we know Christ has wiped our slate clean. He's removed all our sins permanently. And Israel's sins were temporarily covered by animal blood for 12 months at a time. Then when the Day of Atonement rolled around the next year, more animal blood was poured out of the Holy of Holies, and another Band-Aid was put over Israel's sins to cover them temporarily for another year. Now, what the writer's going to get at is this. Now, look, the people in the Old Testament, chapter 11, they had a decent relationship with God. You and I, after the cross, have an even better relationship with God. We have better spiritual resources. Now, if those saints in the Old Testament persevered commendably on the basis of a decent relationship, we who live after the cross and have better resources, better relationship, if they persevered, what ought we to do? At least what they did, if not more, if not better. In other words, writer's going to say, we had no excuse for failure, stopping, quitting the Christian life. Not as long as Christ is interceding for us. So, now, at the top of your handout, you have I want us to take a quick look at the first two verses of Hebrews chapter 12. And here he's going to say, therefore, now the word therefore is looking back to those Old Testament saints. Let us also. Now, I want you to know, and I've said this before, I think on a Wednesday prayer meeting devotion, that we have in the first two verses of chapter 12, spread over two verses, one lengthy sentence in Greek. And here is the only main clause I put in bold italics, right here. Now, why is that important? The main thought of this sentence is expressed in the main clause of this sentence. And what is the main clause? With perseverance, let us keep on running the race. Now, he's not talking about literally running a race. He's using the athletic figure of running the race to describe living the Christian life. And there are a number of similarities between running a race and living the Christian life. For example, there is a starting point and a finishing point in a race. in the Christian life, there's a starting point. When do we start the Christian life? When we're born again, when we're converted, when we become Christians. And there is a finish line. And that finish line will either be our death or when Jesus comes back. Another similarity is it takes effort to run a race. If you ever run a race, you know it takes effort. And it takes effort to live the Christian life. Now we need to remember what Jesus said. The Spirit's willing. Oh, I really want to live the Christian life. But the flesh is weak. Do I have to have my quiet time today? Have I got to go to church again? The flesh is weak. Quite often it doesn't want to cooperate with us in living the Christian life. Now, the path is marked out. The athletes who run a race, they're not the ones who determine the course. The course is determined by the judges and referees in charge of the race. The Christian life is not defined by the church. It's not defined by me and you. What constitutes a Christian life is decided by God. He determines the course of life. And it requires discipline to run a race. I don't remember this man's name, but it seems like, I don't even remember, it must have been 20 years ago. He was in the Olympics running the 220 meters, and boy, he took off real fast. And then maybe a third of the way through, he pulled a major ligament muscle in one of his legs. He couldn't finish. He stopped. And grasped his leg, it was so painful. And all the other runners ran past him. That guy wouldn't quit. You know what he did? He hobbled until he finished the race. Now, of course, he came in last. That was commendable. And the crowd watching stood up and applauded, not the winner. They applauded the loser because he had such determination to finish, even if he had to hobble his way across the finish line. Oh, that required pure determination and discipline. And the Christian life is going to require discipline as well. Now, I was often asked by people, students especially, in my later years at Moody, is there any difference, Dr. Sauer, in the students at Moody now and the students at Moody when you first started teaching? I said, oh, huge difference. When I first started teaching here at Moody, the students were more disciplined. Now they're so undisciplined and lazy and half-hearted. And those students are going to be your pastors, your counselors, your advisors. We better start doing things better and different than what we've been doing. So let's go back to our verse. Now, so with perseverance. Now, this prepositional phrase, I want you to know grammatically, should be right here. But he puts it way ahead at the beginning of the clause to stress it. I wonder why he would do that. To show two things. First of all, the Christian life is not a short 100-meter dash. It is a long, lengthy marathon. And what does perseverance imply? Problems, difficulties, tragedies, persecution that must be endured, that must be weathered. So with perseverance, let us, now I'm going to remove the figure, keep running the race, and put it in a straightforward manner. With perseverance, let us keep on living the life that is marked out for us. God's defined the Christian life. It's in the Bible. Let's find out what that Christian life looks like. Let's find out what the route looks like, and let's stay on course.
I had to learn how to pace myself in a race.
That's right. That's right. We do. And we need to do the same thing in the Christian life as well.
Amen.
Now, I want you to know that while there's only one main clause, here it is, there are, now notice, 1, 2 subordinate clauses, dependent clauses that modify this main clause in verse 12, in verse 1, and in verse 2 there will be another 2 dependent or subordinate clauses also modifying the only main clause right here. And those subordinate clauses are going to raise 4 questions. Number 1, why should you and I run the race until the end? Question number 2, when do we run the race? Question number 3, how do we run the race? And the answer to that is by depending on Christ. And so the fourth question would be, why should we depend on Him to do this? All right, so let's look now at the first clause. Why should we run the race? Because we have so great a multitude of witnesses surrounding us. My question to you is, who are these witnesses right here? See, he's saying, I want you to be loyal and live the Christian life until it's over with, either by Christ's return or you die. Persevere. Don't give up and quit. Why should we do it? Why should we run the race? Because we have so many witnesses. Who are the witnesses, I'm asking you?
Those that gone on before.
Yeah, those mentioned in chapter 11. Now, in what sense are they witnesses? Well, the scholars are divided over that. Half the commentators say they're witnesses in the sense they're up in heaven looking down at you and me grope and struggle down here at like spectators in a stand in a stadium or watching the athletes running a race. Now, I'm not going to go with that interpretation. I think they have far more to occupy their attention than you and me groping and struggling and stumbling down here. I'm going to interpret the witnesses as their lives are witnesses in the sense that they testify. Perseverance is doable. If there had only been one believer in history who persevered, maintained loyally his relationship with God, that would be enough to prove it can be done. But we don't have just one person who did it. We have an innumerable multitude who did it. Remember in chapter 11, he starts out by mentioning the witnesses, the godly saints in the Old Testament, by name, one by one. Then about 2/3 of the way through, he says, I can't keep going in detail like this. In other words, instead of giving you 13 chapters in this book, I'll give you 100 of them. So he stops mentioning the saints by name and starts mentioning them in groups, in committees of people. That's how many there are. So why should we live the Christian? Why should we live the Christian life? Why should we persevere? Because so many people in the past have done it. Now, if you get to heaven, if you cop out, if you give up and quit, and you get up there, we're going to bump into some Old Testament saints. They're going to walk up to you and say, how did you do down there? You had a better relationship, better resources with God than I did. And you're going to say, I didn't make it. I quit before the finish line. You, what? They're going to say. And you had so much more at your disposal than I did at mine. Why did you give up and quit? So if we're going to give up and quit before the Christian life is over, we want to hide from those Old Testament witnesses up there. I don't want to bump into them. They want to know why I failed. And I'm going to feel bad. I had a lot more going for me than you did. Now, second question. When should we persevere? As we rid ourselves of every single weight. Now, we all know that athletes, before they start the race, they will remove all of their heavy civilian clothes and put on a lightweight track suit. They want to rid themselves of anything that's going to add weight, give them another second on their time. They want all hindrances removed, so they're unrestricted. They can run quicker. Now, what he means by weight are moral hindrances that we might have. So the first question is, why should we run the race? So many people have done it. When should we do it? As we lay aside. From time to time, God's going to point out something in your life and mine that is a moral weight. It's making our relationship with the Lord more challenging, more difficult. It makes it harder to live the Christian life. It makes it more difficult to persevere. Years ago, I went up to Wisconsin and was asked to preach 2 consecutive Sundays while the pastor was on vacation. And after the first service, I was approached by a young woman about 25 years old, and she said, God really convicted me of a vice in my life through your sermon, smoking cigarettes. And she said, my mother at home right now is dying of lung cancer that she got from smoking cigarettes. My mother keeps begging me to quit. I just can't stop. And she said, I know that it's bad for my body, it's bad for my health, and I know it's just displeasing God. and I need to quit. And I asked her, have you got any cigarettes here at church? Mm-hmm. Where are they? Out in my car. I said, let's walk out there, and how about you giving me all your cigarettes, and you stop and start, I want you to stop today. She said, okay, I know I got to stop sometime, so let's go out there and I'll give you all my cigarettes. So we went out to her car. She gave me, 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes, and I put them in my suit coat pocket. I said, you have any cigarette lighters? She said, mm-hmm. I said, let me have those too. So gave me 3 or 4 cigarette lighters. I stuffed them. And I said, now I'm going to be back up here next Sunday after the worship service. Let's you and I get together for a little bit, and let's review this coming week, and let's see how you've done in stopping cigarettes. She said, yeah, that's a good idea. So when I went home that day, I usually hang up my coat pocket, but I didn't. I just took it off and laid it on a chair. Well, Sue came into the room and picked it up, and she's going to hang it up for me. First of all, she checked my coat pockets. Husband, dear, would you mind telling me what these cigarettes are doing in your pocket? Oh, honey, every once in a while I enjoy a good smoke. Okay, so that young lady had a moral hindrances. So do you. So do I. Now, periodically, God's going to point them out. We may not even know they're there. Well, there are plenty that we do aren't know that are there. We need to get rid of them. Now, the next question is, how do we run the race? Here are some good examples of hindrances: laziness, gluttony, lack of discipline, bitterness, lust, unforgiving attitude, anger, worldly friends, wrong music, wrong TV shows, wrong magazines, unhealthy relationship, etc., etc. All right, now let's go to question 3. How do we run the race? Verse 2, here is the third question. How do we do it? It literally says by looking to Jesus. Well, he's not talking literally there. We're not going to see him in this life. We'll see him in the next life. What he means is, at conversion, as you and I look to Christ, depended on him, relied on him to remove our sins and bring sinful us into a relationship with a holy God. So post-conversion, we continue to look to him, depend on him. The Christian life it begins with faith, it continues with faith. So how do we do it? By relying on the author and perfecter of our faith, Jesus. Author. At conversion, he prompted. He inspired faith. He made it possible for us to trust him. And he's called the perfecter of our faith. I might have mentioned this young lady years ago from California. One of my students at Moody. Now, Christmas holidays were over. She called me the night before she was going to get on the plane and come back to Chicago to begin the spring semester. And she called and said, Dr. Sauer, I'm calling you to tell you I'm scheduled to fly from California to Chicago or here tomorrow. And I'm calling you because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get on the plane. I said, why not? She said, this was her Achilles heel. She was fearful of flying in airplanes. And she said, every time I get on an airplane, which is rare, I'm just sure it's going to crash and burn. I'm going to die. I'm in my early 20s. I want to know what marriage is like, having children is like. I want to serve God. I'm not ready to die right now. I'll be ready to die when I'm 100 years old. And so I'm afraid to get on airplanes. And so I gave her a pep talk. I gave her reasons why she ought to trust the Lord and get on that plane. And if it crashes, okay. You graduate to something a whole lot better. And she said, I don't want to hear about better right now. I want to get married someday. So I said, now, I want you to get on that plane. And when you land, I want you to come straight to my office. I'll be here, and I want you to come in and let me know, let me see you, and see that you've come. She said, I'm going to try my best, but I'm not sure that I'm going to make it. And I said, no, don't tell me that. I want you to get on that plane. And so she told me too. She said, whenever I get on the plane, I go to the cockpit, and I introduce myself to the pilot and co-pilot, and I give them a pep talk. And I tell them, you guys do your dead level best in flying this airplane from point A to point B and set it down safely on the runway. I'm on board. And so so the next day in the afternoon, she showed up in my office. And she said, I did it. And I said, oh, I'm so proud of you. How'd your flight go? And she said, I guess it was okay. And I said, oh, that doesn't sound very good. How did it go? And she said, well, when I got on board, I went to the cockpit and I introduced myself and I gave the crew a pep talk. And I sat down, we took off, and just after we took off, I looked out, and the right engine was on fire. And so I called the stewardess, and I said, the engine's on fire. Go tell the pilot so we can turn around and go back to the airport. The stewardess looked out and said, I don't think it's on fire. She said, I'm sure it's on fire. Now, either you go to the cockpit or I'm going up there. And the stewardess said, oh, okay, just hang on, stay there, I'll go. So she goes up and tells the pilot there's a frightened passenger who says the right engine's on fire. The pilot looks out and he said, no, there's nothing wrong with that. And the pilot said, just go tell that passenger, sit down, be quiet, everything's fine. So the stewardess goes back and says to my student, the pilot has assured me that the engine's not on fire. And my student said, no, it's on fire, and we're going to crash. And her best friend was sitting with her, also a student at Moody, and her best friend said, this is embarrassing. I'm not going to sit by you anymore, and got up and went to the back of the plane. And my student said, I couldn't believe it. My best friend wouldn't sit with me. And she was telling me this. I was laughing and laughing and laughing. And she said, Dr. Sauer, why are you laughing? I'm serious. And I said, well, my friends tell me, ooh, you shouldn't doubt God. That's bad. Ooh, you need to trust God. That's sinful not to trust Him. And I said, well, I have a bit of a different perspective on your faith than your friends do. I don't doubt you have real faith in Christ. But what kind of faith you got? Like the disciples' faith in a boat on the Sea of Galilee in a storm. They thought they were going to drown. They went and told Jesus, wake up, don't you care we're about to perish? And but what did Jesus do with the disciples' shallow faith? He's the perfecter of it. He deepened it. He grew it. He matured it. And those guys went out and turned the world upside down for Christ. And if you'll just keep walking with God, Jesus is going to deepen your faith as well. Now, the next question is, why should we look to Jesus? And the answer is, here's our fourth subordinate clause, inasmuch as He, in view of the joy before Him, endured the cross. Endure is a synonym for persevere. He did what you and I need to do. He knows what it takes. And what's more, He can enable you and me to persevere. Why can He enable us? He's taken His seat at the right hand of God's throne. He is in the very best place in the universe He could be, in the presence of God for you and me. And what's He doing up there? He's interceding. What's intercession? One party is talking to a second party for the sake of a third party. Now let's identify the three parties. Who is the one party? Who is that? Jesus. He's speaking to a second party. Who would that be? God the Father. And for the sake of a third party, who is that? You as an individual. Me as an individual. Those two are discussing our life, our problems, our tragedies, our opportunities, our decisions, and Jesus is determined to get from God whatever we need to persevere, whatever we need for life and godliness. So, why should we run the race? There's so many who did persevere. If they did it with less than what we've got, we can do it. When do we persevere? As the Lord points out anything we need to get rid of. How do we persevere? By depending on Christ. Why should we depend on Him? He did it. He knows what it takes to enable us to persevere. All right? So, by way of application, we have made a start in the Christian life. That's good. That isn't enough. We are also to finish the Christian life and finish it well. Not by dropping out, not by falling into sin, not by dying in doubt. One of the former professors at Moody died, and those who were there said now this is a man who preached the gospel all over America, this former professor at Moody. And when he died, they quote him as saying, I am scared to die. I don't want to die and go to hell. Well, wait a minute. This man preached salvation, the assurance of salvation, that heaven will be ours. And at the end, what does he do? It didn't seem like he really believed what he preached to others. That is not dying well. We want to die well because there are going to be people watching us, and God can use our death in peace and joy and anticipation as an example for them to imitate. Thirdly, Jesus is currently in heaven interceding for us. He's determined to obtain from God all that we need for life and godliness. He will enable us to persevere and end well, not like that former teacher. We then have no excuse for failure in the Christian life. When I stand before God in judgment, and let's assume that I fail to finish, I fail to persevere, is there one legitimate excuse I can offer God for failure? Is there? No, that's to say Jesus is a failure as an intercessor. He failed to obtain from me whatever it is I needed. All right, now let's take that handout, and I want us to finish the handout. I'm on number 1. All right, so we've looked at the first 2 verses. Now I want to begin and look at some of the major points that help us be prepared for our study ahead. Number 1, the author. Who wrote this book? He doesn't identify himself, but he was undoubtedly a Jewish Christian man with a pastoral concern for his readers. He knows their past history and current trials. He is well respected by them, and he doesn't hesitate to speak his mind. Proverbs 24:26. As one who kisses on the lips, so is he who gives an honest reply. If you kiss somebody on the mouth, that's a sign of affection. When you tell a person not what he wants to hear, but what he needs to hear, that is just as much a sign of affection. And this man loves the sheep he's writing to, and he is quite frank with them. He doesn't hesitate when necessary to rebuke them. He is faithful to encourage them, etc. Now, Romans 2, the readers. Their ethnic identity. They are Jews. Now, there may be some Gentiles mixed in among them, but the church is so overwhelmingly Jewish that we would consider a Jewish Christian church. B, their past experience. They grew wonderfully well. Look at Hebrews 10:34. You joyfully accepted the seizure of your property. They went through one wave of persecution and they lost everything except the shirt on their back. And how did they accept it? Joyfully. That's amazing. He says in 10:32, you endured a great conflict of suffering. The persecution you went through was no small matter. It was immense. It was intense. It was awful. So I'm going to rate their past Christian progress with an A+. They could not have done better. C, but their present spiritual condition, they are going backwards. He's going to say to them in 5:12, by now you ought to be teachers, but you need someone to teach you again the beginning basics, the ABCs of the Christian faith. But you have regressed. You guys, in the past, you did this. You just progressed, you advanced so well, and then you stopped and you turned around because of all the persecution and discouragement. You started going backwards in your Christian faith. So I'm going to rate when they receive this letter in the mail, I'm going to rate their spiritual life as a D-, maybe a D+. That's it. Location, they probably lived in Italy. Now, Romans 3, occasion for writing. What caused the writer to take pen in hand and write this? The reader's woeful spiritual state and the potential peril of apostasy. Now, right now, they are backsliding. And probably most Christians at some point backslide. Instead of going forward for a while, we go backwards. So they are currently backsliding. He's concerned about something worse than that. It is apostasy. Now, what is apostasy? It is the deliberate, permanent rejection of Christ and open hostility to Him and His people. Now, the Bible says that when a person is headed toward apostasy, he can be stopped. But once he passes the point of no return, there is no hope for him. So there is hope before he passes the point of no return, but no hope afterwards. Now, these people are going backwards. They're headed toward apostasy. And the writer sees that. So he's going to jump in and try and give an antidote to prevent apostasy. Now, Romans 4, the purpose. Why did he write this epistle? A, theologically, to demonstrate that Christianity, being the final and climactic word from God, is preeminent to Judaism. Now, he knows that the readers are Jews, and they're thinking about going back to Judaism. And he's going to ask them the question, why leave that which is superior for that which is inferior? Why do that? B, top of the back page. Practically, not only to prevent the readers from apostatizing from Christ and returning to Judaism, but also to encourage them to persevere in the Christian life and to press on to spiritual maturity. Notice what he says here in 6:1. Let us press on. What's he saying here? Look, folks, I made up my mind. I'm going to grow. I'm going to go as far down the path of Christian growth, knowledge, maturity as possible. I want to urge you guys to come with me. He is full of zeal. He is brimming over with enthusiasm. He knows what he wants. He wants to grow as much as possible, receive all the blessings that God has for him in his life, and minister to people and be used of God. Now, Romans 5, the date. I'm going to say prior to AD 70, since Jerusalem's temple was then destroyed, is not mentioned. Now, notice what he says here. The Old Covenant is foundational and on the verge of being set aside. Now, here's my point. The New Covenant is going to supersede the Old Covenant. But when he writes, he speaks in terms as if the Old Covenant is still very much being observed. Priests are constantly offering sacrifices. The Levitical priesthood is still functioning. All of that came to an immediate stop in AD 70. What happened in AD 70? Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. The sacrifices ceased. And the Levitical priesthood ceased. Now, an argument that he's making here is the Old Covenant, the Levitical priesthood, the animal sacrifices are on the verge of stopping. Had this letter been written after AD 70, all he had to do was mention the temple was destroyed, the Levitical priesthood has stopped, no more sacrifices. That would have helped him clinch his argument, but he doesn't mention that, so I take it that this was written just before AD 70. Now, Romans 6, the theme, Jesus' high priestly ministry in heaven in behalf of us believers. Christ entered into heaven to appear now in the presence of God. Look at those last two words. For us. He's there for you and me. He was a servant down here. He's a servant up there. Up there, he's still serving you and me daily by praying for us. Now, Romans 6 key word is the word better, occurring 13 times. 7, what's the nature of Hebrews? Well, according to the writer, he himself calls it, I urge you, brethren, bear with this word of encouragement. I like that word right there, bear. So this is 13 chapters, and I want to urge you to bear with the writer as he takes us through these 13 chapters. Now, Romans 8, the outline, you'll notice the outline is right there before you. It breaks down into three major parts. First 7 chapters are going to present Jesus as a person superior to the leading personalities in Judaism. Look on your handout. I'm under Romans 8a. Jesus is, number one, better than the Old Testament prophets who were great men of God. Secondly, he's better than the angels. The angels, they are incredible, supernatural, heavenly creatures. And he is said to be better than they are, superior to them. Number 3, better than Moses. Moses was the greatest man in the Old Testament according to the Jews, and I agree with that. And then he is better than Aaron. And then the writer's thinking is this: a better worker has a better work. A superior person has a superior ministry, 8:1 through 10:18. And since he has a superior ministry, Jesus can offer you and me a better life, a superior life, than what the Levitical priests can offer their people in Judaism. Okay, so that is our introduction to Hebrews. I've got 2 minutes left. Any questions or comments on this?